Cars and trucks are the single largest contributor to climate change. So as Earth Day approaches, it is tomorrow after all, Link Houston, Air Alliance Houston, and Bike Houston are challenging Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner and the City Council to ditch their cars and use bikes, public transit, or walk.
Right.
Yeah.
So joining us to talk more about this is Joe Catrufo, Executive Director of the nonprofit advocacy group Bike Houston. Joe, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here.
So, not driving, I mean, it's good for the planet, of course, but I mean, is that even possible in a sprawling city like Houston, Texas?
Well, there are challenges to be sure, depending on where you live, but some Houstonians do it every day. About 1 in 10 households in our city, that's about 90,000 households in Houston, have no car. And about 7% of commuters get to work by walking, biking, or public transit. Many more even use buses or light rail, their own 2 feet, or bikes outside of their commutes, including council member Sally Alcorn, who gets around every Friday without a bike, without a car, that is.
It's really inspiring, and more of us should do it, right? It's good for our bodies, it's good for the planet. But Joe, have you heard from other council members or the mayor about accepting the challenge or going through with this tomorrow? And what advice do you give folks who want to forego the car and take a bike to work?
We've heard from a few. There are some who say they believe in the mission, but they're unable to completely go car-free for all of their trips, but can for many of their trips on Earth Day. David Robinson, who's the chair of the Transportation Committee at City Council, he's signed on to go car-free. But for a council member who usually drives, how should they prepare? So, if they plan to take Metro, make sure they have a Q card loaded up with fares, or download the app and buy some prepaid fares. If they plan to use bike share, go to HoustonBcycle.com and figure out how they can use bike share to get around on Earth Day. If they have their own bike, make sure there's air in the tires. Check the chain, make sure it's not squeaking, make sure it's not too loose. Check the brakes, of course. And, you want to make sure you know where your local bus stop is, how far you'll have to walk. If you plan to use light rail, where to board the tram. So there's a little bit of preparation that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of changes over the years. What more do you think our elected leaders can do to make it easier for folks in Houston to get around without driving?
This is all about options. And we know that many of the people who get around without a car in Houston do so because they really don't have another choice. But that's also true of the people who drive. Many of the people who drive don't really have another choice because maybe they live too far from their office, or because transit service isn't frequent enough where they live. They don't know how to ride a bike, or the streets around them, which is the case for most Houstonians, they're just not safe. Yeah. It's difficult to cross the street. It's almost impossible to ride a bike in most neighborhoods in Houston. So most people rely on a car. So our elected leaders really need to lean into alternatives to driving, not just traffic and parking. We need to do land development differently. We need to design our streets differently. And we need to make sure that the option to walk or bike or use public transit is built into every decision that they're making.
Yeah. Joe, I'm glad you touched on the safety aspect of all this. We know you're an advocate for bike riders. What do you tell motorists? I mean, we see bikers all the time. You got to slow down. You got to keep your eyes on the road and move around them. But what do you say to folks who just they want to zip around and not be safe? What tips do you have to drivers?
We all have a right to get home safely at the end of the day. And you need to remember that that person on a bike is not just a cyclist, but it's a mother or a father, a brother, a sister, a parent, a friend, a coworker. These are real people. We tend to put on our blinders when we're driving and forget about the needs of other people. We're in a hurry. We don't think about the danger that our vehicle is capable of creating. And we see it every day. We see people in crashes on highways. We saw someone killed while walking their dog in the Heights just a few days ago by a driver who was going 40 miles per hour on a street where even going 30 miles per hour seems really fast. So we just need to slow down and remember that people's lives are at stake, because cars can be weapons.
Absolutely.
Great points to make.
Yep. Thank you for getting that message out there, Joe. We appreciate that.
Joe Catrufo. Yeah, thank you. Executive Director of the nonprofit advocacy group Bike Houston. Appreciate your insight and perspective this morning. Thanks for joining us.
And we hope the mayor and the council members accept that challenge.
Yes, let's do it.
See them out there.
Step up.